Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you're invited into a profound stillness, a gentle current of timeless understanding that can lead you to quietude and deep, restorative peace. This experience is crafted for you to relax completely, to find clarity amidst the quiet, and to drift into the most nourishing kind of rest. I will share a carefully chosen selection of profound Zen stories and parables, drawn from traditions that have long understood the true nature of mental freedom and emotional ease. Each narrative carries a transformative essence, capable of shifting your entire relationship with distraction, overwhelm, endless thinking, and the relentless pull of external demands. These are not merely tales. They are carefully preserved lessons from those who mastered the art of inner peace, masters who recognized that genuine serenity isn't found in altering our circumstances, but in refining our perception of them. As the ancient wisdom teaches, to be calm is the highest achievement of the self. Over the course of our journey, you'll discover exactly how these enduring truths can profoundly reshape your inner world. As we journey through these remarkable narratives, you'll notice something powerful begin to unfold within you. The tight grip of everyday concerns will begin to soften. The constant hum of your thoughts will start to subside. You'll find yourself naturally settling into a state of profound understanding and peaceful repose. So, allow yourself to settle in deeply now. Let your body surrender to whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you are about to receive profound insights that have awaited your discovery through the ages. Let us explore a story about the wisdom hidden within our unspoken words. This is the silent monk's revelation. In a serene mountain monastery, where morning mist clung to ancient pine trees, Master Sengai lived alongside a devoted monk who had undertaken an extraordinary vow. For 7 long years, this monk had chosen the path of absolute silence, believing that words were obstacles on his journey to enlightenment. Day after day, he moved through the temple grounds like a gentle ghost, sweeping floors, tending gardens, and sitting in meditation without uttering a single sound. The other monks had grown accustomed to his presence, this silent figure who communicated only through bows and gestures. His dedication was unwavering, his commitment absolute. He had convinced himself that each word he didn't speak brought him closer to truth, that silence itself was a form of purification. One bright afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the temple windows, a wealthy merchant arrived at the monastery gates. His cart was laden with sacks of rice, a generous donation to support the monks through the coming winter. The merchant, eager to display his generosity, insisted on carrying the largest sack himself into the main hall. As he struggled with the heavy burden, the inevitable happened. The sack slipped from his grasp, tearing open as it hit the stone floor. Rice scattered everywhere, thousands of white grains spreading across the carefully swept temple floor like snow in a sudden storm. The merchant stood frozen in horror, his face flushed with embarrassment. In that moment, something extraordinary occurred. The silent monk, who had not made a sound for 7 years, suddenly burst into uncontrollable laughter. His voice rang through the temple halls, rich and joyful, as if all the mirth he had stored up was pouring out at once. The other monks stopped their activities, stunned. The merchant looked bewildered. Master Sengai appeared from his quarters, drawn by the unexpected sound. The laughter continued for several minutes, pure and uninhibited, until finally the monk composed himself. He looked around at the scattered rice, at the shocked faces surrounding him, and smiled peacefully. His vow of silence was broken, but his eyes showed no regret. Later that evening, as the temple settled into its nighttime quiet, Master Sengai found the monk sweeping the last grains of rice from the corners of the hall. "Tell me," Sengai said gently, "why did you break your vow today? What moved you to laugh after 7 years of silence?" The monk paused in his sweeping and looked up at his teacher. "Master," he said, his voice clear and thoughtful, "I suddenly realized I had been carrying the weight of words I never spoke. For 7 years, I believed that holding back my voice would bring me closer to truth. But when I saw that rice scattered everywhere, I understood that silence scattered is just as meaningless as words scattered. Both must have their proper place." He gestured to the now clean floor. The rice was meant to nourish us, but scattered carelessly, it became a mess to clean up. My silence was meant to deepen my practice, but held rigidly, it became a prison I built around my own heart. When I saw the rice everywhere, I suddenly understood the absurdity of my attachment, not to speaking, but to not speaking. Master Sengai nodded slowly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Your 7 years of silence taught you when to speak," he said simply. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, speak only endearing speech, speech that is welcomed, speech when it brings no evil to others, is pleasant. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that both silence and speech are tools, not destinations in themselves. Why do we often fall into the trap of believing that spiritual practice requires rigid extremes? Zen Buddhism reveals that the ego mind loves absolutes because they provide a false sense of security and achievement. The silent monk had transformed his practice into a form of spiritual materialism, collecting years of silence like treasures, believing that accumulation would lead to awakening. This story unveils the deeper teaching about the middle way. The Buddha discovered that neither extreme asceticism nor indulgence leads to liberation. Similarly, neither compulsive talking nor rigid silence serves our awakening. What matters is appropriate response. Speaking when speech serves compassion and truth, remaining silent when silence serves the same ends. Consider how often we create unnecessary rules for ourselves, believing that following them perfectly will somehow earn us peace or enlightenment. Perhaps you've told yourself you must meditate for exactly 20 minutes every day, or never express anger, or always be positive. These self-imposed constraints can become just as binding as the silent monk's vow. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This playful paradox points to the balance between acceptance and growth, between being and becoming. We don't need to imprison ourselves in rigid practices to find freedom. The scattered rice represents the messiness of authentic spiritual life. Real practice isn't about maintaining perfect control or following rules flawlessly. It's about responding with wisdom and humor when our carefully constructed spiritual identities fall apart. Sometimes the most profound teaching comes not from our successes, but from the moment our attachments, even attachments to seemingly good things like silence, are revealed as limitations. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual practices and self-imposed rules, can you identify where you might be scattering your energy in rigid adherence to forms rather than embracing the spirit behind them? What attachments to being spiritual might you be ready to release with laughter? As the Buddha taught, the middle way is the safest. True wisdom lies not in extremes, but in the dynamic balance of responding appropriately to each moment with an open heart. Our next story reveals a profound truth about impermanence through an unlikely teacher. This is the story of the broken tea bowl. In a modest temple nestled between rolling hills, Zen master Ika was known throughout the region for his unconventional ways. Among his most curious habits was his devotion to drinking tea from a cracked ceramic bowl that leaked with every sip. The bowl was ancient, its surface spider-webbed with hairline fractures that worsened with each passing season. A small but persistent drip would form at its base whenever filled, creating perpetual puddles on his tea table. The students found this habit bewildering and somewhat embarrassing, especially when visitors came to the temple. Here was their revered master, drinking from damaged pottery, while perfectly beautiful tea bowls sat unused in the temple cupboards. The contrast seemed to diminish his dignity, at least in their minds. "Master," his senior student would say regularly, "please allow us to bring you a proper tea bowl. This one is clearly beyond repair." Other students would nod in agreement, offering their own bowls, some quite expensive and elegant. Wealthy benefactors had gifted the temple with exquisite ceramics, pieces that would honor any tea ceremony. But Master Ika would always decline with a gentle smile. "This bowl and I understand each other," he would say, carefully positioning a small cloth beneath it to catch the drips. "We have developed a relationship over the years. Why would I abandon an old friend?" The students exchanged glances, interpreting this as mere stubbornness or perhaps an excessive attachment to worn-out possessions. Some wondered if their master was becoming senile. Others suspected he was testing their patience or demonstrating some teaching they couldn't grasp. Winter arrived with particular harshness that year. The temple halls grew cold despite the heating, and frost formed on the windows each morning. One crisp morning, as Master Ika lifted his familiar bowl to take his first sip of tea, the inevitable finally occurred. The accumulated stress of countless temperature changes, the weakness of the existing cracks, and perhaps the natural completion of the bowl's destiny converged in a single moment. The bowl shattered completely. The crack that began at the base ran suddenly upward like lightning, and the entire vessel fell apart in his hands. Tea splashed across the table, ceramic pieces scattered on the floor, and steam rose from the hot liquid now soaking into the wooden surface. The student who witnessed this expected his master to be upset, perhaps even distraught at losing his cherished companion. Instead, he found Master Ika carefully kneeling on the floor, collecting each fragment with the tenderness one might show to injured creatures. "Master, what are you doing?" the student asked, rushing to help clean up what seemed like a simple accident. Master Ika looked up from his careful gathering, holding a curved piece of the bowl's rim in his palm. "I'm learning from my teacher," he replied, with profound reverence in his voice. The student looked around, confused. "But master, we are alone. What teacher?" Ika smiled and held up the ceramic fragment. "This bowl taught me that holding water was never its true purpose, showing me impermanence was. For years, it demonstrated through its cracks and leaks that nothing remains unchanged, that beauty exists in deterioration, that function and dysfunction are both temporary states." He placed the piece gently with the others he had collected. "Now it teaches through being broken, what it couldn't teach while whole. In its destruction, it reveals the ultimate truth, that all forms pass away, and in that passing, they offer their greatest wisdom. The student watched as his master continued collecting fragments with the same care he had once shown in drinking from the intact bowl. "Will you try to repair it, master?" "Repair it?" Ika laughed softly. "My dear student, this bowl has completed its teaching. To repair it would be like trying to repeat a lesson already perfectly learned. Its wholeness served one phase of my understanding. Its brokenness serves another. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This tale unveils the profound teaching that our greatest teachers often come disguised as the very things we want to fix, replace, or improve. Why do we resist the natural cycles of deterioration and change? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning toward permanent seeking. We want our relationships to remain stable, our bodies to stay young, our circumstances to improve, and then maintain their improvement. This desire for stasis creates suffering because it places us in constant conflict with reality's fundamental nature. Master Ika's tea bowl represents all the broken aspects of our lives that we rush to repair or replace rather than learn from. The relationship that's showing cracks. The aging body that no longer performs as it once did. The career that's losing its luster. The dreams that haven't materialized as expected. We see these as problems to solve rather than teachers to honor. What emerges from this story is the recognition that impermanence isn't happening to us. It is the very mechanism through which wisdom unfolds. Every ending contains teachings that were impossible during the beginning. Every loss reveals truths that abundance couldn't show us. Every deterioration offers insights that perfection obscures. Consider the broken places in your own life. Perhaps you've experienced a divorce that revealed your capacity for independence, an illness that taught you what truly matters, a career disappointment that redirected you toward more meaningful work, a friendship that ended and showed you patterns you needed to change. These weren't failures of your ability to maintain things. They were completions of learning cycles. Zen teacher Pema Chodron writes, "Things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing." The broken tea bowl demonstrates this perfectly. Its deterioration tested Master Ika's attachment to form while simultaneously healing his illusion that anything in the phenomenal world is meant to last forever. The Buddha said, "Of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme." This isn't morbid contemplation, but life-affirming wisdom. When we truly understand that everything is temporary, we stop trying to make the impermanent permanent and start appreciating the beauty available in each phase of existence. Tonight, as you notice the signs of change and impermanence in your own life, perhaps the way your face has aged, how your interests have evolved, or how a once cherished possession now seems less important, can you receive these as teachings rather than losses? Can you collect the fragments of what's passing away with the same reverence Master Ika showed? As the Buddha taught, everything that has a beginning has an ending. Make your peace with that, and all will be well. The broken tea bowl reminds us that making peace with endings allows us to receive the full teaching that each experience offers. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a tale of a most unusual seeker. This is the story of the backwards walker. The autumn morning was crisp and clear when the strange monk arrived at Master Basui's monastery. The gatekeeper rubbed his eyes, certain he was seeing things incorrectly. The approaching figure was indeed a monk, wearing traditional robes and carrying a simple traveling bundle, but he was walking completely backwards. His steps were careful and deliberate, his posture erect, yet he moved through the world, facing the direction from which he had come. Word spread quickly through the monastery. Monks abandoned their morning chores to witness this peculiar sight. The backwards walker navigated the stone paths with surprising grace, never stumbling despite his unconventional approach. When he reached the main hall, he announced himself to the abbot, still facing away. "Venerable Master Basui," he said, his voice clear and respectful, "I request permission to stay at your monastery for a brief time. I am a seeker on the path, though perhaps not following it as others do." Master Basui, known for his patience with unconventional students, granted permission. What followed were 3 of the most unusual days in the monastery's history. The backwards walker maintained his reversed orientation in every activity. During meals, he sat facing away from the table, reaching behind himself for his rice bowl. In the meditation hall, he positioned his cushion so he faced the back wall while others faced forward. Even his sleeping mat was arranged so he lay with his head pointing opposite to the other monks. At first, the community found his behavior amusing. Some younger monks whispered theories about his condition. Perhaps he had taken a vow, suffered an injury, or was demonstrating some esoteric practice from a distant school. But as the days progressed, his absolute consistency began to create a strange atmosphere. His presence made everyone more aware of directions, of forward and backward, of where they themselves were heading. The backwards walker moved through his daily activities with remarkable mindfulness. Because he couldn't see where he was going, every step required complete presence. He seemed to navigate by sound, smell, and intuition, developing an almost supernatural awareness of his surroundings. Paradoxically, his limitation appeared to enhance his attention. On the 3rd morning, Master Basui could no longer contain his curiosity. As the backwards walker carefully made his way across the courtyard, Basui approached from the side, the only angle from which they could make eye contact. "Good brother," Basui said gently, "your presence here has been a teaching for us all, though I confess I don't understand the lesson. Why do you move through the world in reverse? What wisdom guides this practice?" The backwards walker paused, still facing away from the master. When he spoke, his voice carried both sadness and profound insight. "Master, I spent 40 years rushing toward enlightenment. I studied sutras, practiced meditation, sought teachings from renowned masters, accumulated merit through good works. I was always moving forward, always progressing, always getting closer to the goal." He shifted slightly, his hands folded peacefully in front of him. "One day, during what I thought was my most advanced meditation, I realized I was walking away from where I had always been. Every step forward in my spiritual ambition was a step away from the simple presence that is our true nature. I was seeking what I already possessed, pursuing what was never absent." In that moment, to everyone's astonishment, the monk slowly turned around. For the first time in 3 days, he faced forward, looking directly at Master Basui, with eyes that sparkled with understanding. "But now I see that forward and backward are the same delusion," he said with a gentle smile. "Movement toward enlightenment and movement away from it are both forms of movement. The truth doesn't lie in either direction." With that realization, he sat down on the stone path where he stood. His traveling was complete. He had found what he was seeking, not by going forward or backward, but by stopping entirely. He achieved perfect stillness, and in that stillness, perfect understanding. The Buddha once said, "There is nowhere to go, nothing to do, and no one to be." The deeper teaching here shows us the futility of seeking what we already are through any form of spiritual movement, whether conventional or unconventional. Why do we exhaust ourselves in spiritual pursuit, always trying to get somewhere other than where we are? Zen Buddhism reveals that this seeking itself is often the greatest obstacle to realization. We create elaborate practices, accumulate teachings, and measure our progress, all while missing the simple fact that what we seek is the very awareness with which we seek. The backwards walker's 40 years of forward pursuit represents our conventional approach to spirituality. We think enlightenment is a destination to reach, a state to achieve, a reward for sufficient effort. We attend workshops, read books, collect initiations, and mark our advancement. Each step feels like progress, yet something essential remains elusive. His 3 days of backwards walking symbolize the opposite extreme, rejecting conventional spiritual paths entirely, perhaps thinking that the very act of seeking prevents finding. Some spiritual traditions emphasize this approach. Stop trying, abandon effort, cease all practices. Yet this too becomes a form of seeking, just in the opposite direction. Consider your own spiritual journey. How much energy do you spend trying to become more mindful, more compassionate, more awakened? How often do you evaluate your meditation, grade your spiritual progress, or compare yourself to others on the path? These are forms of forward movement that can take us away from simple presence. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the backwards walker's final realization. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the difference between seeking wisdom and finding it. This is the tale of the master's shadow. In a tranquil monastery surrounded by bamboo groves, a young monk named Dokai had developed an unusual obsession. Unlike his fellow students who focused on meditation, sutra study, or mindful work, Dokai had become completely fascinated with his teacher Mujo's shadow. He believed with absolute conviction that this shadow contained special wisdom unavailable through conventional teachings. Every morning, Dokai would position himself strategically in the meditation hall, not to focus on his breath or posture, but to observe how Master Mujo's shadow fell across the wooden floor. He studied its length at different times of day, noting how it stretched long and thin in early morning, grew shorter as the sun climbed higher, and disappeared entirely when the sun reached its zenith. During walking meditation in the garden, while other monks contemplated each step mindfully, Dokai's attention was entirely captured by how his teacher's shadow moved across the gravel paths. He watched it bend around rocks, fragment through fence slats, and dance with the shadows of swaying bamboo. He filled notebooks with sketches of shadow patterns, convinced he was documenting profound spiritual teachings. When Master Mujo sat teaching in the afternoon sun, Dokai barely heard the words being spoken. Instead, his eyes tracked how the shadow shifted across the tatami mats, how it interacted with the shadows of other students, how it seemed to reach towards certain objects in the room. He interpreted these movements as secret messages, hidden teachings meant especially for him. The other monks found Dokai's behavior peculiar but harmless. Master Mujo, however, noticed everything. He observed how his students' attention never rested on the present moment, but constantly followed the dark projection cast by his physical form. He saw how Dokai's practice had become about seeking something external rather than cultivating inner awareness. For months, Master Mujo said nothing. He allowed Dokai to continue his shadow study, understanding that sometimes students must exhaust their delusions before awakening becomes possible. The young monk grew increasingly sophisticated in his shadow observations, developing theories about the spiritual significance of shadow angles and lengths. Then came a day when thick clouds covered the sky from dawn to dusk. The light was diffuse and grey, creating no shadows anywhere in the monastery. Dokai wandered the halls frantically, checking every room, every corner, searching desperately for his teacher's shadow. Without it, he felt completely lost, unable to practice, unable to learn. During the midday teaching, Dokai sat restlessly, his eyes darting around the evenly lit room. No shadows fell anywhere. He fidgeted with anxiety, unable to concentrate on anything without his familiar object of study. His practice, he realized with growing panic, had become entirely dependent on external conditions. Master Mujo, observing his students' distress, approached him after the teaching ended. "Dokai," he said gently, "you seem troubled today. What is disturbing your peace?" "Master," Dokai replied, his voice filled with frustration, "I cannot find your shadow anywhere. The wisdom I have been studying has vanished. How can I continue my practice without it?" Master Mujo looked at his confused student with compassion. "Where is your teacher now?" he asked simply. Dokai's eyes searched the evenly lit room desperately. "I cannot find your shadow, Master. Without it, I don't know where to look for teachings." In that moment, Master Mujo lifted his foot and stamped it hard on the wooden floor. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder, sharp and immediate. Dokai jumped, his attention suddenly drawn completely into the present moment. "This student has been studying darkness and ignoring the light that creates it," Master Mujo declared, his voice both stern and loving. The Buddha taught, "Look not for refuge to anyone besides yourselves." What emerges from this story is the recognition that true wisdom cannot be found in the projections and reflections of enlightenment, but only in the direct experience of awakened awareness itself. Why do we become so fascinated with the shadows of wisdom rather than wisdom itself? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency towards spiritual materialism, the ego's clever way of turning even the search for truth into a form of seeking external objects. Dokai represents the part of us that wants to make enlightenment into something we can study, analyze, and eventually possess. This ancient wisdom illuminates our habitual pattern of seeking the extraordinary while missing the ordinary miracle of present moment awareness. The shadow represents all the ways we look for wisdom in the wrong places, in special experiences, unusual phenomena, complex theories, or the reflected glory of spiritual teachers. Consider how often in your own spiritual journey you've become fascinated with the shadows rather than the source. Perhaps you've been drawn to dramatic spiritual experiences rather than the quiet constancy of awareness itself. Maybe you've focused on accumulating knowledge about enlightenment rather than cultivating the simple presence in which understanding naturally arises. The shadow requires sunlight to exist, just as spiritual experiences require consciousness to be known. Yet we often become so captivated by the experiences that we forget the awareness in which they appear. We study the movement of thoughts rather than the stillness of mind. We analyze emotions rather than resting in the space that observes them. Zen master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Dokai's obsession with the shadow was a form of studying something external to himself, when the true teaching was available only through direct self-inquiry. The cloudy day represents those times in practice when our usual spiritual supports are unavailable. The meditation that usually calms us feels agitated. The teacher we rely on is absent. The experiences we count on don't arise. These moments reveal how much our practice depends on external conditions, rather than the unconditional awareness that is always present. Master Mujo's stamp on the floor demonstrates the immediacy of awakened presence. No shadows are needed, no special conditions required. The sound arises and passes away in the very awareness that Dokai had been seeking through his elaborate shadow studies. The teaching is always available in the simple directness of this moment. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual seeking, can you notice where you might be studying shadows instead of recognizing the light of awareness itself? What complex spiritual pursuits might you be ready to abandon in favor of the simple recognition of what is always already present? As the Buddha said, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The true teacher is not the shadow cast by wisdom, but the light of awareness that illuminates all experience. Let us continue on our journey with a story that reveals the Buddha nature in the most unexpected places. This is the tale of the laughing stone. Master Fugai was known throughout the region as an unconventional teacher whose methods often baffled his students. His modest temple sat on a hillside overlooking a valley where farmers worked their rice fields, and the sound of flowing water from a nearby stream provided a constant, gentle backdrop to daily life. Among all of Master Fugai's peculiar habits, none puzzled his students more than his relationship with a perfectly ordinary rock that sat on his teaching desk. The stone itself was unremarkable in every way, roughly the size of a human fist, weathered smooth by countless years of rain and wind, grey-brown in colour, with subtle veins of darker mineral running through it. It could have been picked up from any riverbed or mountain path. Yet, Master Fugai treated this common rock as if it were the most precious treasure in the monastery. Several times each day, during teachings, meals, or quiet moments of contemplation, Master Fugai would suddenly pick up the stone and burst into hysterical laughter. His laughter was genuine and infectious, deep belly laughs that shook his entire body and brought tears to his eyes. He would hold the rock close to his face, examining it as if seeing it for the first time, and the laughter would intensify until he could barely catch his breath. The students found this behavior completely mystifying. They would glance at each other during these episodes, wondering if their teacher had lost his mind, or if they were missing some profound spiritual joke. Some students began examining similar stones from the garden, hoping to discover what made Master Fugai's rock so amusing. Others developed elaborate theories about the stone's history. Perhaps it came from a sacred mountain or was blessed by an ancient master. The laughter episodes became a regular feature of monastery life. During serious discussions of Buddhist philosophy, Master Fugai might suddenly grab his stone and dissolve into giggles. In the middle of formal tea ceremonies, he would catch sight of the rock and start chuckling uncontrollably. Even during solemn memorial services, the stone could trigger fits of mirth that seemed wildly inappropriate to the students. As weeks turned to months, the stone became something of a legend among the monks. Visiting teachers would hear about Master Fugai's laughing stone and request to see it, only to witness another episode of inexplicable hilarity. Some visitors left convinced that Fugai was either a crazy saint or simply crazy. The students, however, remained loyal to their teacher while growing increasingly frustrated by their inability to understand his amusement. One morning, as Master Fugai sat teaching about the nature of Buddha consciousness, he reached for his stone as usual. But instead of beginning his typical laughter, he paused, holding the rock gently in both hands. A young monk named Corin, who had been particularly tormented by curiosity about the stone, seized this opportunity. "Master," Corin said, bowing respectfully but speaking with bold desperation, "I can no longer concentrate on your teachings while wondering about that rock. What is so amusing about it? I have examined countless stones and found nothing funny about any of them. Please, tell us what we are missing." Master Fugai looked down at the stone resting in his palms, then up at his eager students. His eyes twinkled with the familiar mirth, but he controlled his laughter long enough to speak. "This stone," he said, holding it up for everyone to see, "has been sitting in meditation for millions of years without moving, without seeking, without asking a single question about enlightenment, without reading sutras, or following teachers or developing practices." He turned the stone slowly in his hands, admiring its simple presence. It has never worried about its spiritual progress. It has never compared itself to other stones or felt inadequate about its practice. It has never had a single doubt about whether it was on the right path or wondered if it was enlightened enough. The students leaned forward, finally beginning to understand. "Yet you restless humans," Master Fugai continued, his voice rising with amusement, "think you need to do something special to find Buddha nature. You sit and struggle, seek and strain, accumulate teachings and measure progress, all while your essential nature remains as naturally present as this stone's stoneness." He placed the stone down gently on the desk with the reverence he might show to the Buddha himself. "I laugh because it has been enlightened longer than any of us, and it doesn't even know what enlightenment means. It simply exists in perfect accordance with its nature, moment after moment, without effort or anxiety." The Buddha once said, "All beings by nature are Buddha." This tale unveils the profound joke at the heart of spiritual seeking. We exhaust ourselves trying to become what we already are. Why do we make enlightenment so complicated when the very awareness seeking enlightenment is itself Buddha nature? Zen Buddhism reveals that our essential nature is already perfect, already awakened, already free. The stone represents this natural state, complete, whole, and at peace without any effort or self-improvement project. The deeper teaching here shows us how we create suffering through the very attempt to escape suffering. We develop elaborate spiritual practices to achieve a peace that is already our fundamental nature. We seek to become mindful when mindfulness is simply the natural awareness with which we're already aware. We try to cultivate compassion when love is the very fabric of our being. Consider how much energy you spend trying to become a better spiritual practitioner. How often do you evaluate your meditation, worry about your progress, or feel inadequate compared to others on the path? These efforts arise from the assumption that you are somehow deficient, that your current state needs improvement to access your true nature. The laughing stone shows us the absurdity of this assumption. Does a wave need to practice being water? Does a flower need to study how to bloom? Does space need to learn to be vast? Our Buddha nature is not something we develop. It's something we recognize was never absent. Master Fugai's laughter represents the joy of this recognition. When we truly see that we've been seeking what we already possess, that we've been trying to achieve what we already are, the cosmic humor becomes apparent. All our spiritual striving, while perhaps useful for clearing away obstacles, cannot create what is already eternally present. Zen teacher Alan Watts often spoke of the backwards law, the idea that the more we seek happiness, the more it eludes us. The stone embodies the resolution to this paradox, perfect contentment with what is without seeking to be different. This doesn't mean we abandon all spiritual practice or personal growth. Rather, we approach them from a different foundation, not as attempts to acquire enlightenment, but as expressions of the enlightenment we already are. The stone doesn't meditate to become enlightened. If stones could meditate, they would meditate as an expression of their natural Buddha nature. The Buddha said, "Look within, you are the Buddha." The stone's millions of years of meditation simply represent the timeless presence of awakened awareness that needs no cultivation, no improvement, no special conditions to exist perfectly. Tonight, as you rest in this moment, can you recognize the stone-like Buddha nature that has never been disturbed by your seeking, never been improved by your practices, never been diminished by your struggles? Can you touch the natural peace that exists without effort, the awareness that knows without trying, the love that flows without seeking an object? As Master Fugai's laughter reminds us, the greatest spiritual joke is that what we've been seeking through such effort has been sitting quietly within us all along, as patient and present as a stone on a teacher's desk. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission. This is the tale of Bankei and the messenger. In the bustling capital city, where merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the renowned Zen master Bankei had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his profound insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankei maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to depart for his next destination, carefully folding his few possessions into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone accustomed to moving in aristocratic circles, likely a retainer or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Venerable master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have detained him today. Would you consider postponing your departure by one day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow?" Bankei, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion, even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply, "I shall remain one more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankei waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached. But instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. "The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand, what is the true nature of consciousness, and how can one realize it directly? If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it." Bankei listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the profound impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankei spoke with characteristic simplicity and directness. "This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer, between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to transmit through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be." Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, embodying the very teaching he had just articulated. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This profound truth reveals itself in Bankei's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by proxy. Spiritual awakening cannot be transmitted second-hand because it is not information, but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and conveyed through intermediaries? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected, rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual transmission requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through intimate investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or transmitted because we are expressions of it. Bankei's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with diligence. The path to freedom cannot be walked by proxy. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been but perhaps never clearly seen. Let us now turn to a story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the tale of the blind man and his lantern. Late one evening, as darkness settled over the village like a soft blanket, a blind man prepared to walk home after spending the day with a dear friend. They had shared tea, conversation, and the comfortable silence that comes between people who truly know each other. But now, the hour was late, and the blind man needed to make his way through the winding streets to his own home. As he prepared to leave, feeling around for his walking stick and adjusting his cloak against the night air, his friend looked out at the pitch-black streets with concern. "Please," the friend said kindly, "let me give you my lantern to carry with you. The streets are particularly dark tonight, and there are many obstacles along the way." The blind man paused, surprised by the offer. "Why would I need a lantern?" he asked with gentle amusement. "You know I cannot see. The light won't help me find my way any better than darkness would. My feet know these streets, and my other senses guide me just fine." "Ah," his friend replied thoughtfully, "but perhaps the lantern isn't for you to see better. Perhaps it's so that others will see you better and won't accidentally bump into you as they hurry through the dark streets." This reasoning made perfect sense to the blind man. While he had learned to navigate the world without sight, he understood that others depended on their eyes and might not notice him in the darkness. "Of course," he said, accepting the lantern gratefully. "How thoughtful of you." The lantern was a simple but beautiful thing, made of rice paper stretched over delicate bamboo strips, with a candle secured safely inside. His friend lit the candle, and the warm glow illuminated a circle of ground around the blind man's feet. Even though he couldn't see the light himself, he could feel its warmth and knew that others would see him coming from a good distance away. Off he went into the night, the lantern swinging gently at his side as he made his way along the familiar path toward home. He felt confident and considerate, knowing that he was taking care both of his own safety and the safety of others who might be traveling these same dark streets. But he had walked only a few yards when suddenly, crack, another traveler walked straight into him. The collision was jarring, sending both men stumbling. The blind man's lantern swayed wildly, and he nearly lost his balance. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" the blind man called out indignantly, steadying himself and adjusting his robes. "Can't you see this lantern? I'm carrying it specifically so people like you won't bump into me." The other traveler, equally surprised by the collision, looked at the blind man's lantern and couldn't help but laugh. "My friend," he said gently, "why don't you light the candle? Your lantern is completely dark." The blind man reached toward his lantern and felt around the bamboo frame. Sure enough, the candle had gone out shortly after he left his friend's house, though he had been completely unaware of it. He had been walking through the darkness, carrying what he believed was a source of light, but was actually just an empty container, no more illuminating than if he had carried nothing at all. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. This tale unveils the profound difference between carrying the container of wisdom and carrying wisdom itself. Why do we so often mistake the form of understanding for understanding itself? Zen Buddhism reveals that we frequently become attached to the external symbols of insight, the books we've read, the retreats we've attended, the spiritual concepts we can discuss, while the actual flame of awareness remains unlit within us. The blind man's situation is deeply familiar to anyone who has walked a spiritual path. We acquire the lantern of teachings, surround ourselves with the framework of practice, and assume that possessing these things means we are illuminated. But unless the candle of direct experience is actually burning, we're still walking in darkness while believing we carry light. Consider your own spiritual or philosophical understanding. How much of what you believe you know is actually lived wisdom, and how much is merely conceptual knowledge you're carrying around like an unlit lantern? The difference becomes apparent only when we encounter the inevitable collisions of real life, moments when our understanding is tested by actual circumstances. In Zen practice, we distinguish between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything ever written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually bite into one, your knowledge remains second-hand. Similarly, we can accumulate vast knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever actually embodying these qualities. The blind man was sincere in his intentions. He genuinely wanted to help others see him and avoid accidents. But his good intentions couldn't substitute for the actual function of a lit candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice, not just wanting to be wise or appearing to be wise, but actually cultivating the direct experience that makes wisdom real. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The lantern represents our self-concept as someone who is wise, spiritual, or enlightened. As long as we're primarily concerned with maintaining this identity, the actual candle of genuine insight remains unlit. The traveler who bumped into the blind man wasn't being cruel when he pointed out the obvious. Sometimes we need others to help us see that our candle has gone out, that we've been coasting on old understanding, without tending to the flame of present moment awareness. Look deeply at your own experience. When do you find yourself carrying an unlit lantern? Perhaps it's when you offer advice you haven't fully integrated yourself, when you speak about peace while feeling agitated inside, or when you present yourself as having figured out something you're still actively struggling with. These aren't moral failures. They're simply signs that it's time to relight the candle. The beauty of this teaching is that discovering our lantern is dark isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. The moment we realize we've been walking in darkness while believing we carried light, we can stop, find a source of flame, and actually illuminate our path. The lantern itself isn't useless. It just needs the essential element that makes it functional. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we encounter this same dynamic repeatedly. We develop the outer forms of expertise, the vocabulary, the credentials, the appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose touch with the living essence that originally inspired us. The marriage counselor whose own relationship is struggling, the teacher who has stopped learning, the spiritual practitioner who has become rigid in their practice, all are carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. One moment of genuine presence, authentic compassion, or real understanding illuminates more than years of accumulated concepts. The lit candle, however small, provides actual guidance in a way that the most beautiful empty lantern cannot. Zen practice continually asks us to check whether our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or from memory? Are we acting from present awareness or from habit? Are we offering genuine warmth and illumination, or just the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about achieving perfection or never having our candle go out. Candles extinguish naturally. That's their nature. Wind blows them out. They burn down. They flicker and fade. The practice is in noticing when the light has gone out and having the humility to relight it rather than pretending it's still burning. Tonight, as you consider the various roles you play and the wisdom you believe you possess, can you honestly assess which lanterns in your life are actually lit? Where are you carrying genuine understanding? And where might you be relying on the mere appearance of insight? Can you find the courage to acknowledge the dark lanterns without shame, seeing them simply as opportunities to rekindle authentic understanding? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Eventually, the darkness of an unlit lantern reveals itself through collision with reality. But rather than waiting for these inevitable bumps, we can choose to tend our inner flame with the same care we would give to any precious light, knowing that when it burns brightly, it illuminates not only our own path, but helps others find their way as well. Let us continue with a story about the limits of understanding and the honesty of not knowing. This is the teaching of the Emperor and Master Gudo. The Emperor of Japan, a man accustomed to receiving definitive answers from his advisors and scholars, had arranged a private audience with Master Gudo, one of the most respected Zen teachers in the realm. The Emperor came with genuine curiosity about spiritual matters, particularly questions about life, death, and what might lie beyond ordinary understanding. Seated in the formal chamber where matters of state were usually discussed, the Emperor felt comfortable posing even the most profound questions to this renowned master. After all, if anyone would possess answers to life's deepest mysteries, surely it would be an enlightened Zen teacher who had spent decades in contemplation and practice. Master Gudo, the Emperor began with the directness that comes from a lifetime of authority. I have a question that has troubled many great minds throughout history. What happens to a man of enlightenment after death? Surely someone of your spiritual attainment would understand such matters. The emperor expected a profound discourse on the nature of consciousness after physical death, perhaps insights into rebirth, karma, or the eternal nature of enlightened awareness. He was prepared to hear about subtle realms, the dissolution of individual consciousness into cosmic unity, or other elevated teachings that would satisfy his curiosity about this ultimate mystery. Instead, Master Gudo looked at the emperor with complete equanimity and gave the most honest answer possible. "How should I know?" The emperor was taken aback. Here was a master revered throughout the land for his wisdom, essentially admitting ignorance about what seemed like a fundamental spiritual question. "But master," the emperor pressed, somewhat incredulous, "you are an enlightened teacher. Surely you must have special knowledge about such things." Gudo's response was immediate and perfectly logical. "Yes, sir, but not a dead one." The simplicity of this exchange contains a profound teaching about the nature of genuine wisdom and the difference between authentic understanding and pretended knowledge. As the Buddha taught, "I know nothing except the fact of my ignorance." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound honesty that characterizes true spiritual maturity, the willingness to admit the limits of one's knowledge, rather than pretending to understand what cannot be known from one's current position. Why do we expect spiritual teachers to have answers to questions that can only be resolved through direct experience? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between conceptual knowledge and lived understanding, between what we can theorize about and what we can actually know. Master Gudo's response wasn't a failure of wisdom, but a demonstration of it. He refused to engage in speculation about experiences he hadn't had, even when pressed by someone in a position of great authority. His honesty revealed more wisdom than any elaborate theory about post-death consciousness could have provided. Consider how often in daily life we pretend to know things we don't actually know. Whether it's offering confident opinions about complex social issues, giving definitive advice about other people's relationships, or claiming certainty about uncertain outcomes, we often feel pressured to appear knowledgeable rather than admitting the limits of our understanding. The emperor's assumption that enlightenment should include knowledge about death reflects a common misconception about spiritual development. We imagine that awakening provides a comprehensive database of cosmic information rather than a fundamental shift in how we relate to not knowing. In Zen practice, we cultivate what Suzuki Roshi called "don't know mind," a state of open awareness that doesn't need to fill every gap in understanding with theories or beliefs. This isn't ignorance, but a wise recognition that direct experience is more valuable than second-hand information. Zen Master Linchi taught, "There is nothing special to do, nothing special to learn." Enlightenment doesn't grant supernatural knowledge about matters beyond ordinary experience. A living master knows about living. What happens after death remains in the realm of speculation until one actually dies. The Buddha said, "Believe nothing merely because you have been told it. But whatsoever, after due examination and analysis, you find to be conducive to the good, the benefit, the welfare of all beings, that doctrine believe and cling to." Even the Buddha encouraged direct investigation over accepting claims based on authority. Gudo's teaching reveals the freedom that comes from releasing the need to have opinions about everything. How much mental energy do we waste constructing theories about things we cannot possibly know? How much suffering comes from worrying about scenarios we can only imagine? Look deeply at your own relationship with not knowing. Where do you pretend certainty to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? What would change if you could say, "I don't know," with the same confidence that Master Gudo displayed. The emperor sought knowledge about death from someone who was vibrantly alive. But true wisdom might be found not in accumulating information about future experiences, but in fully engaging with present reality. The mystery of death is honored not by pretending to solve it, but by living authentically in the face of it. Tonight, as you encounter questions about the future, about others' motivations, or about cosmic mysteries, can you remember Master Gudo's honest simplicity? Can you find the courage to admit when you don't know, discovering that don't know mind might be wiser than all our clever theories? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. In a world full of false certainties and confident ignorance, the Master's honest, "How should I know?" points toward a more genuine relationship with mystery, one that honors what cannot be known, while fully embracing what can be directly experienced. Let us continue on our journey with a story about discovering the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart. In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student approached his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an ancient maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing earnestly for years, yet lately questions had been arising that reached deeper than formal instruction. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the student gathered courage to voice what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to excel in studies, to accomplish things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest longing that had once driven his own seeking. After contemplative silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this admission. "Why did you desire their pride so intensely?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender recognition. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be secure and abundant. But the reason I desired this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something essential. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I, in turn, would feel I had sufficient reason to love and accept myself. I was seeking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be evidence of my worthiness, even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my striving." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. "But then one day, I awakened to a revolutionary possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could bypass all external validation and simply learn to love and accept myself unconditionally? What if I didn't require anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence?" The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. "I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer circumstances, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as constant as my own heartbeat, independent of any external validation?" The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never considered. "And that realization began your quest for self-realization?" "Exactly," the master nodded. "That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with discovering what was already complete within." After contemplative silence, the student asked, "And did you never again desire their pride? Did that longing completely disappear?" The master chuckled softly. "Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Conditioned patterns don't vanish overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before." He gestured toward the darkening garden, where fireflies had begun their dance. "I learned to see those approval-seeking thoughts as passing phenomena, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could observe them with interest and compassion, but I no longer gave them power to determine my worth." "So you still cared what others thought?" the student asked. "I respected their opinions and honored their perspectives," the master replied. "But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the determining factor in whether I felt at peace with myself." The master's face radiated quiet joy. "And never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like discovering I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was revealed to have been within me all along." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with destructive thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the master's discovery. Most suffering stems from the mistaken belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through external achievements or approval. Here, we discover one of the most revolutionary insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural birthright to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy, not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, achievement, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance feels foreign. Our culture intensifies this conditioning by promoting the myth that happiness comes from external sources. Each message reinforces the delusion that we are incomplete as we are. Consider how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you modify authentic expression to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on external feedback rather than internal recognition of inherent value? When we love ourselves unconditionally, we create a foundation of fulfillment that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with gratitude rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without devastation, because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You, yourself, deserve your love and affection." This isn't narcissism. It's recognition of fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and witnesses your experiences is not improved or diminished by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear, like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the tenderness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a beloved child learning, or the same compassion you'd feel for a friend in difficulties. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for authentic transformation. In discovering this unconditional love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here, beating steadily in our own hearts. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the Venerable Abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Cho's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Chao Cho reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Chao Cho stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Chao Cho calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, It is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao Chou's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Chou offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. Let us keep going on our journey. The following story reveals the difference between helping and holding on. This is the lesson of the two monks and the woman at the river. Two monks were traveling together along a mountain path, making their way to a distant monastery where they planned to continue their studies. Both were dedicated practitioners who had taken strict vows as part of their spiritual training, including a vow to avoid all physical contact with women. This wasn't born from disrespect, but from their understanding that such discipline helped maintain focus on their spiritual development. As they approached a swollen river where the usual bridge had been damaged by recent storms, they encountered a young woman standing uncertainly at the water's edge. The current was strong and treacherous, filled with debris from the mountain runoff, and she was clearly afraid to attempt crossing alone. "Please, honored monks," she called to them, "could one of you help me cross this dangerous water? I'm not strong enough to make it safely on my own." One of the monks immediately tensed, his mind racing through their monastic rules and the potential complications of this situation. Physical contact with women was explicitly forbidden, and he began formulating explanations for why they couldn't help, perhaps suggestions for alternative solutions that wouldn't require breaking their vows. The other monk, however, took one look at the woman's predicament and the genuine danger she faced, and made a different choice. Without hesitation or lengthy deliberation, he walked to her side and gently lifted her onto his shoulders. He carried her carefully across the treacherous current, ensuring her safety with each step, and set her down gently on the far bank. "Thank you so much," she said gratefully, bowing to both monks before continuing on her way. The two monks resumed their journey, but the atmosphere between them had changed dramatically. The first monk walked in increasingly agitated silence, his mind churning with thoughts about what he had witnessed. As the hours passed, his internal tension grew until finally he could no longer contain his distress. "Brother," he burst out, unable to hold his silence any longer, "I cannot understand your behavior back at the river. Our spiritual training explicitly teaches us to avoid any physical contact with women. Yet you picked that woman up onto your shoulders and carried her across the water. How could you so blatantly violate our sacred vows?" His companion looked at him with gentle surprise and responded with perfect simplicity. "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river hours ago, but you are still carrying her." Buddha's wisdom teaches us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This tale unveils the profound difference between compassionate action and mental attachment, between responding to present needs and carrying past events. Why do we often carry situations long after they've ended, replaying scenarios and nursing grievances that only exist in our own minds? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our inability to release experiences once they've passed. The first monk's agitation demonstrates how rigid adherence to rules can sometimes conflict with the compassionate spirit that inspired those rules originally. His fellow monk saw a person in danger and responded with immediate kindness, then completely released the incident. But the first monk carried the event for hours, letting it grow heavier with each step. Consider your own tendency to replay past conversations, nurse old grievances, or mentally rehearse scenarios that have already ended. How much of your mental energy goes toward carrying situations that exist now only in memory? The woman crossed the river in minutes, but the monk carried her for hours through his own thoughts. This teaching applies to far more than dramatic violations of rules. We carry harsh words someone spoke years ago, mistakes we made decades past, embarrassing moments that no one else even remembers. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich with possibility and actual experience, goes unnoticed because we're too busy carrying ghosts from the past. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between appropriate action and unnecessary attachment. The second monk helped when help was needed, then moved on completely. He didn't dwell on whether he'd made the right choice, worry about others' opinions, or replay the incident endlessly in his mind. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The river crossing was impermanent. It began, served its purpose, and ended. Only the first monk's attachment to the event gave it ongoing existence in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax, right now, and rest." This teaching points directly to the freedom available when we stop carrying experiences beyond their natural lifespan. Look deeply at what you might be carrying unnecessarily. Old resentments, past failures, conversations that upset you, decisions you regret. All of these exist now only because you continue to pick them up and carry them. What would it feel like to set them down? The irony is profound. The monk who actually broke the rule experienced no suffering from it, while the monk who maintained perfect rule observance created hours of agitation for himself. This reveals that suffering often comes not from our actions, but from our thoughts about our actions. Tonight, as you notice your mind returning to past events, old grievances, or situations that have already ended, can you remember the wise monk's example? Can you practice setting down whatever you've been carrying unnecessarily, discovering the lightness that comes from traveling through life without the burden of yesterday's experiences? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. True spiritual practice isn't about perfect rule following, but about responding appropriately to what's actually present, then releasing it completely to make space for whatever comes next. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom, rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all three in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the intensity required for genuine spiritual awakening. This is the tale of the drowning lesson. Beside a crystal clear mountain river, where water flowed over smooth stones with the endless song of moving current, a hermit had established his practice. For years, he had lived in solitude, finding in the rhythm of flowing water and changing seasons a perfect mirror for the movements of his own consciousness. One morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the canopy and the air carried the fresh scent of mountain laurel, a young man approached the hermit's simple dwelling. The seeker had traveled far, his clothing dusty from the journey, his face earnest with spiritual longing. "Master," the young man said, bowing respectfully. "I wish to become your disciple." The hermit looked up from his contemplation, studying the newcomer with eyes that had grown accustomed to reading the subtle signs of genuine versus superficial spiritual interest. "Why?" the hermit replied simply. The young man paused, considering his answer carefully. "Because I want to find God," he said finally, believing this to be the most noble response. What happened next took the seeker completely by surprise. Without warning, the hermit sprang to his feet, grabbed the young man by the scruff of his neck, and dragged him toward the river. Before the stunned visitor could protest, he found himself being pushed into the clear, cold water. The hermit's strong hands forced the young man's head beneath the surface and held him there. Panic set in immediately. The seeker's lungs began to burn as his oxygen depleted. He kicked and struggled with increasing desperation, his arms flailing as he fought to break free. Every second felt like an eternity as his body screamed for air. Nothing existed except the urgent, overwhelming need to breathe. After what seemed like a lifetime but was probably only a minute, the hermit finally pulled the gasping young man up out of the water. The seeker coughed violently, water streaming from his nose and mouth as he struggled to fill his lungs with precious air. His entire body shook from cold, shock, and the aftermath of near drowning. When his breathing finally normalized, the hermit spoke again, his voice carrying a different quality, still gentle, but charged with unmistakable intensity. "Tell me," he said, watching the young man's face carefully, "what did you want most of all when you were underwater?" The answer came without hesitation, raw and honest. "Air." The hermit nodded slowly, satisfied that his lesson had found its mark. "Very well," he said. "Go home and come back to me when you want God as much as you just wanted air." Without another word, the hermit turned and walked back to his place of meditation, leaving the dripping, shaken young man to contemplate the profound teaching he had just received. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Yet this wisdom must be ignited by genuine spiritual fire, not merely intellectual interest. The hermit's dramatic teaching illuminates the difference between casual spiritual curiosity and the total commitment that authentic awakening requires. What emerges from this story is recognition that spiritual seeking demands the same intensity and urgency we naturally bring to physical survival. The young seeker thought he wanted God, but his desire was still within the realm of preference rather than necessity. He wanted spiritual awakening as an addition to life rather than as life itself. Why do we approach spiritual development with tentative commitment? First is our attachment to comfort and the familiar. Genuine transformation requires letting go of who we think we are, which the ego experiences as death. Second is our misunderstanding of what spiritual seeking entails. Popular culture presents awakening as a pleasant expansion, but traditional teachings describe it as a dismantling of illusion. Third is our tendency to compartmentalize spirituality as one area among others, rather than a complete reorientation of our relationship to existence. Consider how this plays out in contemporary seeking. We collect techniques like trophies, jumping from meditation retreats to healing workshops to consciousness conferences, accumulating experiences without allowing any single practice to fundamentally transform us. We want the insurance policy of spiritual development without paying the premium of total dedication. The drowning experience represents what mystics call the dark night of the soul, moments when our usual sources of identity and security are stripped away. In such moments, we discover what we truly value most deeply. This is the quality of desire that spiritual awakening requires. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck wrote, "Practice is not about achieving some special state. Practice is about being willing to die to who you think you are." The hermit's lesson brought the young seeker face to face with this death-like quality of authentic spiritual work. This intensity doesn't mean spiritual practice should be grim. Rather, it means bringing the same passionate engagement to inner development that we naturally bring to whatever we value most deeply. A musician practicing for Carnegie Hall, a scientist pursuing a breakthrough, all demonstrate the focused dedication that spiritual awakening requires. The river represents the flow of ordinary consciousness, where we spend most of our time skimming along the surface. Being pushed underwater symbolizes the necessity of going deeper into the unconscious patterns that actually govern our lives. This depth work requires the same survival level intensity the seeker experienced when deprived of air. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual aspirations, can you honestly assess the quality of your desire? Is your seeking driven by curiosity and preference, or by necessity? What would it mean to want truth as much as you want your next breath? As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The path to awakening lies not in accumulating more spiritual experiences, but in bringing the totality of our being to whatever practice we choose. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master was sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real. It is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough, but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention.
"Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?"
The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured toward the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson. "I have learned to always like what I get, so I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding, like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance, not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The terrain favored his opponents, and by every conventional measure of military strategy, the coming battle should result in devastating defeat. Yet something deep within him remained convinced that victory was possible. Perhaps it was intuition, perhaps it was desperate hope, but he felt certain that his cause was just, and his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the massive force arrayed against them. Fear rippled through their ranks like a contagion. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with pessimism spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their morale was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be defeated, regardless of any other factors. Technical skill, superior weapons, even numerical advantage means nothing when soldiers have already surrendered in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that conviction. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the centuries to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks, "we have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself reveal our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with anticipation. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment, this one flip of metals spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its arc as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back, down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer erupted from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and embraced each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was assured. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and coordinated power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a decisive victory, routing forces much larger than their own and securing a triumph that would be remembered for generations. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his lieutenant approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the lieutenant said, "what an incredible thing. The coin revealed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decreed." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the coin, holding it so his lieutenant could examine it closely. "No one can change destiny." The lieutenant looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." Here we discover the profound truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence, when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what unfolds? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all external circumstances, we have tremendous power over the internal conditions that determine how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something profound about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their numerical disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome superior numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply manipulate his troops through deception. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are predetermined, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the psychological conditions that allowed their best qualities to manifest. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure, regardless of external circumstances. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see. The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their numerical disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality, assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on obstacles rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort? And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin, a practice or perspective that consistently orients you toward positive engagement regardless of circumstances? The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of consciousness itself. When we approach situations with genuine confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover capabilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the outcomes you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create internal conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have profound influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. Our next story reveals how liberation comes not from achieving something new, but from recognizing what was never born and can never die. This is the teaching of freedom from birth and death. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted on the spring breeze, a dedicated student named Goshu approached the wise Zen master Yue. For years, Goshu had been practicing meditation, studying texts, and following all the prescribed methods of spiritual development. Yet despite his sincere efforts, he felt no closer to the enlightenment he desperately sought. Goshu bowed respectfully before his teacher, his face showing the strain of prolonged spiritual seeking. "Master, I have been studying Zen for many years, following every instruction, sitting in meditation daily, reading the ancient texts. But I have not yet succeeded. I feel as lost as when I began. Please give me some guidance. What am I missing? What more must I do?" Yue looked at his earnest student with compassion, seeing the weight of spiritual ambition that had become a burden rather than a path to freedom. He understood that Goshu's very effort to achieve enlightenment had become the obstacle to recognizing his inherent awakeness. "There is no secret trick to Zen study," Yue said simply. "It's just a matter of freedom from birth and death." Goshu's brow furrowed with confusion. This answer seemed to make his quest even more daunting. "Master, how does one pass through birth and death to freedom? That sounds like the most difficult task of all. If I cannot even quiet my mind for a few minutes, how can I transcend birth and death?" Yui's eyes brightened, and he raised his voice with sudden intensity. "Your every passing thought is birth and death." At these words, something shifted dramatically in Goshu's understanding. Like a veil suddenly lifted, he saw that what he had been seeking as some future attainment was actually the very nature of his present experience. The constant arising and passing away of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. This endless flow was not something to escape, but the very freedom he had been pursuing. Goshu went into ecstasy, feeling as if he had put down a heavy burden he didn't even realize he had been carrying. The relief was profound and immediate. All his years of struggling to become something special dissolved into the recognition that he had never been anything other than the aware space in which all experience appears and disappears. As the Buddha observed, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What emerges from this story is the recognition that we suffer not because we lack something, but because we don't recognize the freedom that is our fundamental nature. Why do we carry the heavy burden of spiritual becoming? Zen Buddhism points to our identification with the content of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. We mistake ourselves for the stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, instead of recognizing ourselves as the aware space in which this stream flows. Every thought that arises is born. Every thought that fades away dies. Every emotion emerges from nowhere and dissolves back into nowhere. Every sensation appears and disappears. This constant birth and death happening in awareness is not a problem to solve, but the very movement of life itself. The deeper understanding here reveals that what we call birth and death are simply names we give to the natural flowing of experience. When we identify with the flow, we suffer the anxiety of constant change. When we recognize ourselves as the awareness in which the flow appears, we discover unshakable peace. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the extraordinary fact that the enlightenment we seek is not hidden in special states, but in the ordinary awareness that knows every state. The same awareness that knows anxiety also knows peace. The same awareness that knows confusion also knows clarity. The Buddha said, "In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. Our spiritual seeking often creates the very problem it attempts to solve by imagining that some states of consciousness are spiritual while others are mundane. Consider how much energy you invest in trying to have better thoughts, more peaceful emotions, or more pleasant experiences. Each effort to improve the content of consciousness reinforces the belief that you are that content, rather than the awareness that witnesses it all with equal presence. In Japanese Zen, there is a teaching called just sitting, or shikantaza. This practice involves recognizing that the sitting itself is enlightenment, rather than a method to achieve enlightenment. Similarly, your current awareness, exactly as it is the freedom you seek, rather than a stepping stone to freedom. Tonight, as thoughts arise and pass away in your awareness, can you recognize the birth and death that UEA pointed to? Can you see that you are not the thoughts that come and go, but the unchanging awareness in which they appear? As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The salvation is not in perfecting the conditioned, but in recognizing the unconditioned awareness that you already are. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising two fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here." The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise, for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man! I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these 2 very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, "he insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation." Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up 2 fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with 2 eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment. The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up 3 fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the 2 of us, there were only 3 eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners. The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how 2 people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our 2 monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind. Maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Let us now explore a story about choice, responsibility, and the power we hold in every moment. This is the tale of the young man and the bird. A clever young student had grown tired of his teacher's seemingly wise responses to every question. He was convinced that the old master simply spoke in riddles to appear profound, and he decided to devise a test that would expose what he believed was mere pretense. After thinking for several days, he conceived what he thought was the perfect trap. One morning, the young man caught a small sparrow in the garden. The tiny bird trembled in his cupped hands, its heart beating rapidly against his palms. He held it carefully behind his back as he approached his teacher, who was sitting peacefully in the morning sunlight, reading ancient texts. "Master," the student called out with barely concealed excitement, "I have a question that will test your legendary wisdom." The old teacher looked up from his reading with patient, gentle eyes. He had seen this look of mischievous confidence in many students over the years, and he understood the young man's need to challenge authority as part of his own growth and learning. "Please," the teacher said simply, "ask your question." The student stepped closer, keeping the bird hidden behind his back. "Master, I hold a small bird in my hands. Using your great wisdom, tell me, is this bird alive or dead?" The young man felt incredibly clever. He had created what he believed was an impossible situation for his teacher. If the master answered alive, he would quickly snap the bird's neck and reveal the dead creature, proving the teacher wrong. If the master answered dead, he would simply open his hands and let the living bird fly away, again proving the teacher's lack of true insight. Either way, the student was certain he would expose his teacher's supposed wisdom as nothing more than lucky guessing and philosophical double talk. He waited eagerly for the response that would give him the satisfaction of finally outsmarting the old man. The teacher sat quietly for a long moment, not trying to peer behind the student's back or gather more information. His eyes seemed to look not at the student, but through him, as if perceiving something far deeper than the simple trick being attempted. Finally, with a gentle smile that held both compassion and understanding, the master spoke. "The answer, my young friend, is in your hands." The student stood frozen, his mouth hanging open slightly. In 3 simple words, his elaborate trap had been completely dismantled. The teacher hadn't fallen for either option of the false dilemma. Instead, he had pointed to something far more profound: the fundamental truth that the student himself held the power to determine the outcome. The young man looked down at his hands, still cupped behind his back, feeling the tiny bird's rapid heartbeat against his palms. He realized with startling clarity that the master was right. The bird's fate had never depended on the teacher's answer or supposed wisdom. It had always been entirely in the student's control. More than that, he began to understand that this was true about far more than just this moment. The power to choose life or death, creation or destruction, compassion or cruelty, all of it was always in his hands, in every situation, every day. Slowly, the young man brought his hands forward and opened them. The small bird sat still for just a moment, as if gathering itself, then spread its wings and flew into the blue sky, disappearing among the trees. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound responsibility that comes with conscious choice and the recognition that we are always the architects of our own experience. Why do we so often look outside ourselves for answers that can only be found within? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to seek authority figures who will tell us what to do, what to think, what to choose. But the deepest teaching is that true wisdom cannot be given from one person to another. It can only be discovered through our own conscious engagement with life. The student's question seemed to be about the teacher's insight, but it was actually about his own power. He was so focused on proving the master wrong that he almost missed the profound truth being offered, that every moment presents us with choices that shape not only our immediate circumstances, but our character and destiny. Consider your own daily decisions, both large and small. How often do you wait for someone else to tell you what the right choice is? How frequently do you seek permission, approval, or guidance for decisions that ultimately rest entirely in your own hands? The young man's bird represents all the power we hold, but sometimes fail to recognize. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual development, we constantly face moments where we hold something precious in our hands, the well-being of others, our own integrity, opportunities for growth or destruction. The outcome depends not on external circumstances or other people's wisdom, but on what we choose to do with the power we possess. The master's response reveals something crucial about authentic teaching. True teachers don't give answers. They point us back to our own capacity for wisdom. They help us recognize the choices we're already making and the power we already possess, rather than encouraging dependence on their authority. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "We are always in choice, even when we think we're not." The bird in the student's hands represents all the moments when we convince ourselves we have no options, no power, no responsibility. But consciousness always involves choice, and choice always involves responsibility. Look deeply at a current challenge in your life. Where are you waiting for someone else to provide answers, solutions, or direction? What would change if you fully recognize that the power to shape the outcome is already in your hands? This doesn't mean you have control over all external circumstances, but you always have choice about how you respond. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Every thought, every intention, every action is like the student's choice with the bird, an opportunity to create life or death, beauty or suffering, wisdom or ignorance. The answer is always in our hands. Tonight, as you consider the various situations in your life where you seek guidance or feel powerless, can you sense the truth the Master was pointing to? Can you feel the weight of the choices you carry every day, not as a burden, but as the fundamental dignity of conscious existence? As the Buddha observed, No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. The bird flies free, not because of the teacher's wisdom, but because of the student's choice. In recognizing our own power to choose life over death, compassion over cruelty, truth over deception, we discover that the answer to every important question has always been in our hands. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow." But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change." Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax, right now, and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Tonight, as we gently draw our time together to a close, can you feel how the calm you've discovered isn't something you've gained from outside yourself, but rather something you've simply remembered was already there? Can you sense that the deep tranquility you've experienced tonight doesn't live only in these teachings, but rests quietly within your own awareness, patiently waiting for you to notice it? The Buddha reminded us, what we think, we become. As you reflect on these words, recognize that serenity and understanding don't require perfect conditions or extraordinary experiences. They flow naturally from your own mind and heart, available to you in any moment you choose to turn inward. Each story we've shared tonight has carried the same essential message, woven through different voices and circumstances, that our struggles lighten when we stop fighting so hard, that genuine freedom comes when we learn to hold things lightly, and that lasting calm appears when we see through our mental habits and automatic reactions. Even when your thoughts wander tomorrow, even when life feels overwhelming again, the insights you've gathered tonight have taken root in your understanding, ready to steady you whenever need them most. As you settle into rest, Notice that these timeless lessons haven't shown you a complicated journey to somewhere else. They've simply reminded you how to be fully here, completely present in this very moment. In the stillness that surrounds you now, feel how naturally your perspective has softened, how easily your breathing has deepened, and how peacefully your mind can rest when you're not asking it to do anything at all. These ancient wisdoms point to something beautifully simple, that clarity isn't hidden in distant places or complex practices. It lives in the straightforward act of paying attention, of being awake to what's actually happening right now. Tonight, you've touched that simplicity, a truth that reveals itself whenever we pause our rushing and really listen. As you transition from this quiet space back into your everyday world, take with you not just the words you've heard, but the spacious awareness they've awakened. Let this understanding be your companion, offering guidance and comfort through whatever comes your way. Remember that this peace isn't fragile or temporary. It's as natural as breathing, as reliable as your own capacity to be present. You haven't learned something new tonight so much as you've remembered something true. Thank you for sharing this journey with us at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.